In three, two, and one. Welcome, everybody, to this week's special NFL Combine edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. I am Hub Arkush, our Shaw Local Bears Insider beat reporter for the Bears, Sean Hammond, and I are just back from Indianapolis at the Combine. We're joined by our Shaw Group Sports editor, Kyle Neighbors, and guys, interesting week in Indy, and I know everybody wants to talk about the players and the Bears and the NFC North and this and that, but real quick, Sean, we noticed as soon as we got there that just it felt almost too normal. You didn't really see COVID protocols much anywhere. The mask decision seemed about 70-30, and it was about the 30% wearing the masks, not the 70%. There wasn't a lot to suggest that we were still in a pandemic world. And after the last 2 years, I suspect everybody is relieved by that. Hopefully we're not jumping the gun too soon. But then it was followed up on Thursday by the NFL announcing that they'd agreed with the players that there would be no more COVID protocols, that they were moving on back to business as usual. Teams can do what they choose to do individually, but the NFL now no longer has any restrictions on their teams or their players or their front office or staff folks relative to COVID.
I'm sure teams love that. They can take a deep breath after 2 years of constant adjustments and dealing with these protocols, and hopefully we can get the open locker room back with that as well, because that would really make me happy.
Well, and Kyle, that was going to be my segue, because talking to folks there, teams are already explaining and preparing players for the fact that the open locker room is coming back. This has not been widely reported, but there's actually been negotiations, or at least a position taken by the NFLPA with the owners, that they'd like the open locker rooms not to come back, that they don't want reporters in their locker rooms during the week.
Too bad.
That would be devastating to the media. And the owners will give it to them if they can get something from the players. So, that's one to watch. I mean, the owners, they understand that we do supply their number one and best and cheapest form of marketing and promotion, not to mention being their, communication with their fan base. And so they're not just going to say, okay, no problem, because they know the media is going to raise a stink. But should the players be willing to concede significantly on something else, like an 18th game, which we know is a conversation that's going to be coming at some point, or even something less than that, then the open locker room could go away. But to Sean's point, with all the COVID mitigations and protocols, goes the open locker room. And there were several, staff team folks indicating to some of us in the media and off the record, or not off the record, but side conversations, that players are already being told, get ready, because the media is coming back in the locker room.
It's good to hear that. It's a big part of our job. The last couple of years have, not surprisingly, has made reporting on professional sports a lot more difficult with the limited access. It's like any relationship. If you don't have time to build trust with people, they're a lot more guarded, and being able to be in there, not just on a Sunday after a game, but throughout the week, and just being able to talk to guys. And some that a lot of times you're not even reporting stuff that you're talking with guys. It's literally building relationships and just shooting the shit with them sometimes. And that makes a big difference.
It's the key to the whole thing, Kyle. I mean, we get it. It's funny because there is the one benefit to the whole Zoom world and dealing with players that way is that even though it can be frustrating, if you have a specific question that you need to get asked and you want an answer to your question, you do get your turn. Now, the downside of that is that if you think you've got an angle that nobody else has and you ask a question that relates to it, you're now sharing it with everybody else in the media, which is fine as long as somebody doesn't jump on it, make it the theme of their coverage or their story. But what you don't ever get, you don't get to know any of these guys. You don't get to find out, a lot of the time when I talk to players in the locker room, it's rarely to get a quote for a story. A lot of times I don't even bring the tape recorder because I find that they're more open and more willing to talk. But it's to learn who you're dealing with, to have a better idea and how to read these guys. And that's been missing the last couple of years. And that's why, when we talk about some of these, particularly some of these younger players, Larry Borum is a great example. I mean, this kid's a great story when you think about it, just the way he's transitioned himself and his ceiling as a prospect in the years since he came out of Missouri. And yet all any of us really know from him is the stock answer, speaking into a microphone or a computer screen, knowing that there's not only 20, 30 media members listening, but all of those Zoom conferences were available to the public too. And so, you know, they're going to be careful, at least when you get these kids one-on-one. You know, you can get to know them. If you can get comfortable with them, you can have a conversation. And Sean, I think more than anything, that's the most critical thing that's been lost to us in our coverage over the last 2 years. Yeah,
those conversations are much more candid when you're not sticking cameras in their face. You know, and obviously that's a part of their job, and that'll happen too, you know, after every game or when there's big news. But it'd be nice to talk to some of these guys just without the camera and get their real thoughts. And there's some importance too to just them seeing your face and getting that facial recognition. You know, whether they remember my name after our conversation or not doesn't really matter. You know, as long as they see us around, that's a good thing.
You know, Kyle, let me give a great example, and then we'll move on to the combine and you know, all the news of the day. But and this is actually a Shaw Media story or event, if you will. But 3 years ago, in doing pre-COVID with our Shaw MVAs, our most valuable athletes from our high school athletes through the entire northern half of Illinois, we'd have a presentation ceremony. We used to do it at the Convocation Center at Northern Illinois University. We'd bring in 400 or 500 high school athletes, their families, and have I would MC it, and we'd give awards to the most valuable athletes, but we'd also have usually a couple special guests, and it was usually the Bears because they're the best known around town. And it was the last one that we did before COVID that my co-hosts or speakers were Akeem Hicks and Zach Miller. Now, I knew Zach a little bit, and I had interviewed Akeem. You know, he knew who I was. But that night, we got to spend 4 or 5 hours together. There's some downtime during the dinner and the presentations. You really get to know somebody. And coming out of that, we had a relationship. Now, we've never been best friends. I'm not on speed dial with him. He's never called me. I'm not saying that. But he got to know me through that evening, and then he would kind of occasionally seek me out in the not seek me out, but see me in the locker room or stop me in the hall, and we really could talk. And this year with the contract and the wasn't really a holdout, but whatever you call it, the negotiations, there's no question in my mind that I could have done better reporting on it, that I would have gotten better information from him. I would have certainly understood better what was going on if we'd been allowed to talk somewhere in the building. Yeah, I could have called him, but that's where it gets uncomfortable, and they're going to be more careful. And so it really does not only, limit our ability to do our job, but more importantly, it limits the stories that we can tell to the people we're reporting for. And I hope our listeners and viewers and readers all understand that.
I'll follow it up with a couple more examples of exactly how much of an impact they have. Josh Tolentino is a Shaw Media alum, covered NIU football for us. He's a great young reporter, went on to work for The Athletic when he left us, covering the Green Bay Packers, then went down. He's had several stops with The Athletic, went down to the Tampa Bay Rays, then the Miami Dolphins. He now covers the Eagles for the Philadelphia Inquirer. But two stories he did during his time during The Athletic when he was in Green Bay, I believe it was David Bakhtiari. He got to know pretty well and found out Bakhtiari is like a huge barbecue guy. And through that, he spent a Sunday afternoon, during the offseason with Bakhtiari cooking out and wrote a story on it. Then when he was covering the Tampa Bay Rays, he got to know Tyler Glasnow, a really good young pitcher, after Tyler got his first big contract, and actually went house shopping with him. And that's the type of thing, without locker room access, it's really hard to develop that type of relationship to be able to write that type of story.
It's impossible. And even if you, and those are great examples, but Sean, even if we're not talking about some of the special feature stuff, just getting inside their heads about the team, about their teammates, about their coaching, there's a ton of off the record stuff that if you're worth anything at all as a reporter, you don't report because it was off the record, but you learn the way people's minds work, the way they think. When you see something, you realize you might normally say, oh my God, how could he do that? But then because of some things that you've talked about off the record, you can at least understand it a little better and you can report more fairly and accurately. And I think that the players and coaches appreciate this too, because of the last thing I said. It helps you to report more fairly and accurately, to know the people you're reporting on. And it's not anybody's fault. I mean, we did what we had to do with COVID, but that's why it'll be such a tremendous relief to have a lot of that out of the way.
Kyle, that's a well-timed shout out to Josh too, because I just ran into him this week.
Oh, yeah?
And got to chat for a little bit, so it was good to catch up.
Nice.
All right, guys. So as Sean said, he just ran into an old friend. We ran into a lot of old friends and comrades and acquaintances The combine, not quite the Super Bowl that usually hands out, well, not usually, but in recent years has handed out between 4,000 and 5,000 credentials. There is usually, I've been told, in the vicinity of 1,000 credentialed media members at the combine. I don't think it was 1,000 this year. The one thing that was still, and some of this may have been COVID related, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was just budgets in our business these days. But the media room itself was not nearly as busy and populated as the media workroom is what I'm talking about, which is a big hall in the convention center. Now, they did have us 6 feet apart. They did space the chairs differently, which was one of the last remaining, leftovers from the COVID protocols, but still a little smaller crowd. But there was still at least, 600-700 media people there, I would think. And as usual, it ended up, I think, close to the number of 300 plus athletes. There was some talk earlier in the season that, maybe they'd have just a smaller crowd in the top prospects, but that changed. They brought in as many as they usually do. And, Sean, everything else about the combine was what it usually is. It's like a Sunday afternoon, I don't want to call it a flea market because these are very valuable assets, but, everybody's showing their wares, whether it was players, agents, teams are out in force, entire coaching staffs with some teams, entire scouting departments. And it was all football 24/7. And I think that's what makes it such a fun event. I think the media, Sean, I don't know if you'd agree, and Kyle, I don't know if you did any combines in your day, but I think most of the media would agree that this is probably the most relaxed and most fun of the gatherings that we have, each year.
Yeah, as a first timer, second year on the beat, but there was no combine last year. I was really interested to get down there and see it. And you're right, Hub. I mean, you're walking around downtown Indy and you see coaches across the street that you recognize, and there's people in the Starbucks and all over the place. And it was really cool to see those coaches and GMs, once they had their media sessions, it was like one after the other, rapid fire. And we're getting these guys who we talk about all year long, all in one place. And that's a really valuable situation to have.
And Kyle, being the good steward that I try to be, I made sure that young Hammond here got to Elmo's. I don't eat red meat, so it's not the kind of place that I normally hang out, but you got to go to Elmo's if you go to Indianapolis. And I did see the look on his face when he tasted the cocktail sauce on the shrimp. So he is now a combine veteran.
Yes, I was given no warning about that.
You were given no warning. Are you kidding? That's the only reason anybody goes there. I didn't realize. It never occurred to me you weren't prepared for that.
No, I do like spicy things though, so I was pleasantly surprised.
The other reason everybody goes to Indy is to get their sinuses cleared out once a year at Elmo's. But
get the cocktail sauce going.
Well, I mean, it's kind of one of there's 3 or 4 spots. There's Kilroy's, there's the Pulse. There are a few places where the NFL people gather, and it's kind of a wild after hours scene. And I guess again, it's part of what makes the combine. But let's get to the football players. Let's get to the Bears. I guess I know a lot of our listeners most interested in that.
We got some comment or some questions lined up here, so we should, if we can, let's dig into those here pretty quick.
All right, yeah, I was just going to set it up by saying each time now that we get to visit with Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, we get to know them a little better. They have a little more time under their belts. And Sean, before we get to the comments, I would just say that I was much more impressed with both of them just between their introductory press conference and the small groups that we did shortly after. This has now been our next exposure to them, and it appeared to me that they were 90% more comfortable, and it felt more normal. Particularly impressed with Ryan Poles, who sat with just the Chicago media for about 15-20 minutes, and he has settled in now. And, really, I thought answered what he could, carried himself very well. And now you start to see why, even though he's only 36 years old, so many teams have been so impressed with him as one of the youngest executives in the league. Yeah,
we're not going to get, and we don't expect to get specific answers on some of this stuff, but I did think that Ryan Poles, for the questions he was asked and what he could say, he did a pretty good job. And Matt Eberflus too is looking pretty comfortable in that position. And I think that's just having been on the job a month, and a month ago when we first talked to them, it was discussions about what they want this to look like, what they want their staff to look like, and now they've hired those people. They have those positions set. They have their guys in place, and they're really just getting down to business and figuring out how to build this team. And I think that's certainly going to give them some confidence, especially this time of year.
Kyle, it's interesting with Flus, and I think I may have made this comment on the radio, and it is not a criticism, it's a compliment, actually, but it's just different, is most football coaches look and sound like football coaches. It's what they've always done. I think we have a notion, and not of, when I say look, I'm not talking about their faces necessarily or anything like that, but just in general, they carry themselves, maybe is the way I should say it, and sound like football coaches. And yet this year, for some reason, we have a few who they don't seem to fit the mold. The guy who strikes me the most is Mike McDaniel down in Miami. He sounds more like my piano teacher than a football coach. I mean, he's a different kind of cat, and highly respected. I wrote a column that I'm sure it's still archived at shawlocal.com. He was a guy I wanted the Bears to interview for the head coaching job when he was still lesser known, but I thought wildly successful in his first year as a coordinator with the 49ers. And the other guy is Flus, because he just, for some reason, I feel like I'm talking to my high school math teacher, more than the head football coach. Now, everything he says, I'm impressed by it, and I love his resume. I think he's a good hire. It's just this kind of impression that you get. I'm interested to see as we get to know him. It's an unfortunate measure to be measured against, but when people see the Bears head coach, they expect to see either George Halas or Mike Ditka. And in various respects, Wani and Lovey and certainly John Fox and even Nagy, there was something about either their energy or the way they carried themselves. I left out Mark Trestman on purpose because Trestman was just different.
That was fun for a while.
Yeah, it was really different. But they all, you had to feel, this is Bears head football coach. Flus is he usually has a smile or at least a slight grin. He's very well spoken. But I guess it's just the way he speaks or delivers things that it feels a little different to me, and I'm intrigued to see how the team responds to it. So again, much like I said about Ryan Poles, here's a guy who 5 weeks later, very comfortable, gave good answers, I thought, and I think we've settled in now to where, okay, the new stuff is over, and the next thing to do is to pick some players and then put them on the practice field.
Yeah, Matt Eberflus, during the introductory press conference, he broke out the acronym, the HITS acronym, and I think immediately everyone went, "Oh no, let's not get too football-y." But since then, he definitely has settled in. I think we've got to see his personality a little bit more. Clearly, was nervous that first day, which is understandable. Yeah. I mean, I would be terrified in a setting like that. But yeah, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Vic in terms of the way he approaches, the way he talks to the media. Like he's an NFL football coach. He's not going to give you much. But like the way he does it, you at least feel like you're getting useful information. And when he tells you, or when he doesn't want to answer a question, he doesn't make you feel dumb about it, which is a fine line to walk when you're an NFL coach.
Yeah, and again, please let me be as clear as I can. We don't judge these folks on the way they look or the way they talk. It's what they do. But there's a certain stereotype or at least archetype that you get used to. And Flus is a little different. He doesn't quite.
But I mean, it's not just because it does end up mattering in the fans' eyes, because as they hear him on the radio more and more, if they hear the same recycled answer or the same kind of, maybe not sarcastic, but like dismissive tone. I mean, that was what got John Fox in the most trouble, was the way he seemed dismissive all the time. And Eberflus, at least in the early going, is pretty much the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, well, the other thing that'll get them in trouble with fans real quick is if they don't think that they have a temper, they get serious or get upset enough. And when we talked to Frank Reich about Matt, I think it was the day after he was hired, I asked Frank that question specifically. I said, Frank, he seems like a really good guy, but I'm having a hard time picturing him getting upset, reading somebody out, jumping on a player. And Frank Reich's response was, "Trust me, he's got a temper." It's maybe we just need to see it the first time. At any rate, we obviously weren't going to see it at the combine. It was very impressive getting to visit with these guys again. They seem to be, growing into their jobs really well. They've got their staffs complete. We talked about their staffs. They explained some of the ramifications behind how it was put together. And now it's time to coach and play some football. And I know a lot of our By the way, folks, if you're listening as a podcast, we really appreciate it. We hope that you have a subscription, that you went to iTunes or the App Store on your phone or shawlocal.com and at least signed up for or downloaded so that it's delivered to you each week. But you can also join us live every Friday morning, 9:30 Chicago time, as we record this podcast. Just go to @Kyle Neighbors on your Twitter account, or go to @Sean_Hammond, @Hub_Arkush. That'll bring you right into, or at least give you the directions as to what button to push to join this podcast. And we love to have you participate, because we get to hear what's on your mind and try and at least speak to it or answer your questions as best we can. So with that, Kyle, why don't you start teeing us up?
Yeah, one more thing there to promote, I guess. If you do join us live, jump into YouTube. One, you can ask us questions on there, but also make sure you hit the subscribe button, because we've actually seen a good amount of new subscribers on the YouTube channel. The more people subscribe, the more people that like the videos, the easier it is for new people to find it on YouTube. So if you could do us a favor and hit that. And with that, let's dive into some questions. We got several in here about wide receivers. Mark was the first one in. But before we get into wide receivers here, I want to throw this one up from Gary quick, just because I actually want clarification from him, if I can. That's a wide receiver from here. He asked about, based on the comment from Poles on the O-line, can you see Whitehair being a cap saver? Need a little bit more context. Maybe you guys remember about.
Yeah, well, I know what he's talking about.
Okay, that's why I did not remember.
I'm sure Sean knows what he's talking about too. This was one of the things that impressed me about Ryan Poles, is that he was not going to call out any players. They didn't name any names. We talked obviously about Allen Robinson and a few other guys. We'll get to his comments on A-Rob in a few minutes, I'm sure, because that was interesting too. But he said specifically, he started it out, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, by saying we're going to change our style up there a little bit. And then he said specifically, we're going to get lighter and quicker. And so they, there are two schools of thought. You want a bunch of the 340-pound maulers, because theoretically that helps you run the football better, or you want to be lighter and athletic and more mobile, particularly with his inside and outside zone read stuff that is basically dominating the NFL right now in run games. It can make it a little tougher to pass protect if you're giving up too much size, but then you work on technique. And Poles told us, he said, that's what they're going for. I don't think that impacts Cody Whitehair, though. Cody Whitehair is not a huge, oversized guy. He was a left tackle his last 2 years at Kansas State when the Bears drafted him, and they said immediately he's going into guard because they didn't think he was big enough out there. And so I don't know that he was talking about anybody specifically. He mentioned Andre Tucker, the Bears trainer, and talked about working with the guys that they have to shed some body fat and add some muscle. That's really what he was talking about, as much as changing players, as he was talking about changing style and getting players who are here to adapt to it. So, Sean, I think it probably tells you Jason Peters won't be back, which we kind of knew anyway, because he's 40 years old. But that 6'4", 350-pound body, that's the body type that I shouldn't say that he won't be back, but it seems unlikely, because that's the kind of player he's describing. Now, it was stunning to me that Peters, coming off the fishing hole down in Texas, was ready to start and play 60 minutes with no off season. And by week 5, week 6, he was moving pretty good in that big, bad, ugly body. But stylistically, Sean, I'm pretty sure that's what Gary is referring to. And that was the comment that Poles made that probably got him thinking.
Yeah, we talked about it in August, but, all these linemen are big, of course. But when Jason Peters walked in there the first time, that was a dude who you looked at and you said, oh, my gosh, that's a big dude. He just stood out. He has an interesting body type and body shape. But I wouldn't necessarily expect them to cut any of the guys who are under contract. I think you hit it on the head there, Hub. It's more about changing the way these guys train and maybe even in subtle ways. They're obviously still going to be big dudes and they need to be able to move a lot of weight, but changing the way that they approach their off-season training, and maybe that's going to be getting a little bit lighter. Go ahead, Kyle.
I saw Jason McKee tweet out a picture, and then I think Greg Gabriel retweeted it, about a guide that they were given back during Jason's playing days, where it hit the trainers at the time, I can't remember who it was, laid out
2006.
It was laid out specific body weight or body fat percentages for players to hit and stuff like that. And Jason was saying, I believe that, or maybe it was Greg that retweeted and said that, the Bears will probably follow a similar philosophy with their new strength and conditioning staff.
Well, the Bears strength and conditioning coach that brought that to Chicago was Rusty Jones, who was legendary in the business. They got him out of Buffalo after about 20 years, and he basically helped build that 2006 Super Bowl team. Now, I can't remember if he was his assistant or not. He was just the guy who followed Rusty, but that was Jim Arthur, who Matt Eberflus has now brought back to be the strength and conditioning coach. And so, that is obviously an important trend to them. But it was interesting, Sean, you may have to help me here. The first player that Ryan Poles signed after getting the job is an offensive tackle. His first name was Willie, and I'm drawing a blank on his second name.
Wasn't it? I think there was some alliteration there. Wasn't it WW? Hold on. I got
Wright?
it here. Yeah, that's it. Willie
Wright.
Wright.
I just didn't want to say his name wrong. But what struck me is he's 6 foot, 305 pounds. That's a really small NFL offensive lineman, particularly since they said he was an offensive tackle. Now he's a practice squad guy, or a guy who's been, he's young. He may turn out to be great. I'm not knocking Willie Wright. I haven't met him yet. But the size just jumped out at me. And so then when Ryan said that on Tuesday, it's pretty clear what they're going for. However, when you talk about possibly, cutting a Cody Whitehair, look at the column. It's right now at Shaw Local. Actually, I guess it should have been posted. I wrote it yesterday because it's something that I tried to put things in terms that nobody's talked about yet, and yet it's right there in front of us. Due to free agency, the Bears have to find 10 new starters. Forget the question of are they going to rebuild or are they going to compete? They're stuck in the middle here where they've got enough exciting talent on each side of the ball that they can reload and expect to compete this year, especially if there's a change at quarterback in Green Bay. But the flip side of it is that you look at Allen Robinson. You have to have 3 starting wide receivers. The Bears never did, but Marquise Goodwin was supposed to be their 3rd best wide receiver. So you look at wide receiver, Allen Robinson and Marquise Goodwin are both free agents. You look at the offensive line of your 5 starters, Jason Peters, Jermaine Ifedi, and James Daniels are all free agents. And you may hope that Tevin Jenkins or Larry Borom are going to take those 2 tackle spots, but you don't know that. Borom may have to kick inside if you don't re-sign Daniels. But the point is,
you certainly don't want to have to depend on those 2.
Yeah,
that's great if that's your plan, but you're going to need more than that.
Yeah, and so all I'm saying here, guys, is that they're so thin already up front that the idea of cutting Cody Whitehair, who's been a Pro Bowl center and they feel has a higher ceiling at guard. And plus, there's a lot of people who want to try and upgrade Sam Mustipher. So, no, I think the most stunning thing they could do right now would be, and they don't have cap issues. I mean, they've got room under the cap to make some moves. They can also create a fair amount more room without, creating any more holes on the roster. So I can't imagine why Cody Whitehair would be gone.
The other thing with Cody Whitehair, if you want to cut him, the $8.1 million in savings from cutting him don't kick in until after the post June 1st date, at which point you can still find bodies, but you're not going to find, the type of player, caliber of player to really fill that void. And I don't know if you need that type of that savings when you're starting to get into the June, July, August period, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you may, because there's different dates at which you hit the cap. So, on June 1, I can't remember if June 1 is the day where your top 51, where every team has to be under the cap with their top 51. I thought it was in July, but there has to be a reason why those cuts are June 1. Either way, though, guys, the Bears have more than enough cap space, even with their meager 5 draft picks, to be able to work free agency in the draft and do what they have to do. I do think there'll be some cap casualties. I think Eddie Goldman will probably be gone. I think Danny Trevathan will probably be gone, which is unfortunate because I love Trevathan. I like Goldman too, but Trevathan in particular, I think, is an important guy in the locker room. But at this point, between those 2 alone, you've got $11.1 million in cap savings. And what you can do is you can cut them now, but you don't cut them now, but you can say you're cutting them and designate them as post June 1. And so it gives you the same cap effect that you're looking for. So gosh, I can't imagine why they would move Cody Whitehair.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case. A couple other names to watch in terms of potential cuts. Nick Foles is a $3 million cap saving. And I mean, considering we don't know the health of Tariq Cohen, and what they plan to do there, he's about another $2.5 million in cap savings.
Well, and Tariq was a player that Ryan was asked about specifically, and he said, we're not there yet. We don't know, whether physically he's going to be able to go or not. It was not negative, and it was not a ringing endorsement. He just said that we don't know. The problem with cutting Tariq Cohn is that Jakeem Grant is also a free agent, and so this team, guys, dominated in the return game for 4 or 5 years with the move from Cordero Patterson and Tariq Cohn now to Jakeem Grant. Even Khalil Herbert looks promising returning kickoffs, but he's not going to return punts. And you can't ignore that part of the game. There are middle of the road teams, the 8-9 and 9-8 teams, that it was their special teams or their return game that hurt them. So I think that they'd love to see Tariq back to the player he once was. The question is, can he ever get there?
It's hard to tell after he wasn't able to get back on the field at all in 2021, Sean.
Yeah. What, Kyle, we got other questions here?
Yeah. So before I jump into the wide receiver question, CJ had something, because I have a good friend who's like a giant draft beatnik, who was just bombarding me with 40 times during the wide receiver yesterday. I wanted to shut my phone off, but CJ asks about 40 times here, so I'll throw that up here, Hub.
I haven't logged them all yet, but I do know that I think something was wrong with the clock, because the record is 4.22. And there were like half a dozen guys that were, there was a 4.21 that they adjusted. There was another 4.21. I can't remember. Unfortunately, I'm still getting to know these kids. And there was literally a half a dozen guys in the 4.2s, and that's really unusual. So there is going to be speed to burn. The only thing I would caution Bears fans about is that was the last gasp of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, bringing in Marquise Goodwin, bringing in Damiere Byrd, having drafted. It's one people forget. The reason they drafted Darnell Mooney is because they definitely needed speed to supplement A-Rob and what they had then. And Mooney had run 4.37. He was the fastest wide receiver on the board in the 5th round when they took him. That's why they took him.
Well, and this is what CJ's getting at here, because Mooney hasn't turned out to be quite the burner. I mean, he's been a very good receiver, but not the speed guy user. So CJ's asking about data point and functional speed. What's a good drill to watch to learn more about functional speed?
It's called tape. There are no drills to watch that. I mean, they're drills, and so you can't really tell. But you certainly can see it in practice. You see it more. It's probably the thing that more than anything you get from the game tape. And this is one of the reasons. I was just reading, I think it was my buddy Greg Gabriel. We mentioned Greg a little while ago. Had another tweet that I saw last night, which he reminded everybody that Devontae Adams ran 4.56 at the combine and then 4.51 on his pro day. And he is arguably the best wide receiver in football right now. And he said it's as much as anything because of functional football speed. And it's a real thing. There's no question about that. But the only way you watch that is by, you don't see functional football speed unless they're playing football, So CJ, there are no drills that are going to tell you that. That's where you got to watch the game tape, or at least that's, Sean, my opinion anyway.
Yeah. And you know what, Hub? Greg's had some great tweets all week. He's always got he's always got good tweets, from being in the room where this stuff happens. But I love the combine stuff. He's been telling, tweeting all week about what that experience is like from his side of it.
This is his Super Bowl. I mean, Greg Gabriel, 32 years as an NFL scout, 10 years as the director of college scouting for the Chicago Bears. And Greg has worked with us at Shaw since he got out of the league and continues. He and I exchange a lot of information as we build our draft board for the draft. And he's one of the best out there. But you're talking to somebody whose job depended on it. So he does know what he's talking about when he gets into some of this stuff.
Well, what was it a couple of years ago? It kind of became the go-to one. I'm blanking on the name of the drill. It's a cone drill. Is it the triple cone? What is it called? I'm blanking out on it.
Well, there's 2 cone drills, and I forget what they're called. But the short area quickness, I think there's a 4 cone and a 12 something. I don't know. It
might have been 4.
Yeah.
So that kind of became like the in one. Everyone was like, "Oh, we're past 40 time. We're gonna look at this cone drill." But to me, that also isn't a great representation, because one, turning around a cone is a lot different than having an NFL cornerback or safety give you a little bump at the top of your route.
Well, yeah, and I think this is where I mentioned short area quickness. I think the cone drills can be a better indication of a guy's route running skills, his ability to stop on a dime and cut and turn and accelerate out of it. Um, but as far as functional football speed, it's a combination of a number of things, and you see some guys have it. Allen Robinson. I mean, I don't know if Allen Robinson would get under 4.6 in the 40. I'm not saying he's not fast. He's faster than me, obviously, but I mean. He's a classic example of a guy who's an outstanding route runner. He's a big possession receiver, but he also has extremely good functional football speed.
CJ followed it up with this, which I think this is a really good place to go to. Once again, we will get to the wide receivers, I promise, but a lot of draft prospect opting out of drills at the combine. Do you foresee a time when the combine goes away and pro days become the standard?
No, because the combine has other things than drills. And most teams will tell you that the most valuable part of the combine is the player interviews, and it's the medicals. Those are the two things that teams rely on more than anything else. I mean, a lot of the bench press stuff, seeing how players handle interviews with the media, that stuff is all important to them. But most teams, in terms of the other thing, is that you have a consistent measurement, guys. I mean, it's the same electronic timing on these drills and on the 40, whereas you get to these pro days and it just depends on who's holding the stopwatch and how quick they are with the button. So the information coming out of the combine is more accurate, and I think that you'll probably continue to have both for the foreseeable future. There actually was really disappointing news to a lot of us, except for Jerry Jones. But apparently they're talking about moving the combine to Dallas next year for reasons that completely escape me. But that's on board.
Our guy 8 Hour Vibe says, how soon until Goodell moves the combine to primetime NBC? That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, I think that the NFL teams are finding the on-field stuff to be less critical than it was in the past. But the combine's not going away. It's become a thing for the NFL. At some point, you start to wonder if they're going to try and find ways to get people to work out at the combine instead of holding off into their pro days. I don't know what type of mechanism they would even have, but this is a 3 or 4, might even be 5-day thing at this point, where it's free advertising for the NFL during a slow time of year.
Yeah, it runs all the way through the weekend.
Kyle, you just touched on something really interesting, and maybe there's a column for one of us in this, but I'll tell you how you do it. Pay them. They're pros now. They've entered the draft. So, guys, we understand you don't want to run the drills, but everybody who runs the drills gets $5,000. You can pass on the 5K. Now, a lot of guys still will, the ones who know that they're going to be first-round picks, but you're going to see a whole lot of kids who haven't been paid. I know they're getting paid in college. They've always been getting paid in college. They're getting paid legally in college now. But to a lot of them, why did I pick that number? Well, if there's 300 kids and everybody runs, that's $300,000. And so if it's 1,000, and $1,000 to these young men whose minimum salary is about to be $600,000 a year, it's all, but 5,000 still feels like a big number. So that's $1.5 million. That is you find that at the bottom of the petty cash drawer in the NFL, and that's the way you'll get some of them to do it. Other than that, I don't think much is going to change.
And heck, you could give them a big bonus too if they get the fastest 40 time or the best bench press, whatever. You
just gave them marketing from a great idea there, Sean.
I do think, though, guys, in fairness to the young athletes, a lot of them, it's not that they don't want to work out; they don't want to get hurt. There's 300 guys, and this is all happening in real time, so I forget who it was again. But one of the wide receivers popped a hamstring yesterday, and running the 40, and now he may not even be ready for his pro day. I mean, this could cost him 2-3 rounds in the draft. It could cost him getting drafted. He could end up I don't remember which prospect it was, but I do think it was like a mid-round guy. And so that could be devastating. And that's something that scares these guys. The guys who kind of piss me off, to be honest with you, are the quarterbacks who don't throw, because there's no reason not to. Now I know Matt Corral got injured in the bowl game, says he's not ready. There are occasionally guys who come with a legitimate reason. But the bottom line is that they don't do it because they want to control that drill in their own environment with their own chosen receivers. And I think that's kind of BS. I think these quarterbacks, I can't understand why they wouldn't throw at the combine.
I think I saw Sam Howell is going to throw, but like he wasn't going to do agility drills. Did I see that correct, Sean? Do you remember?
I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah, we were listening to him on the way back, Sean, on NFL radio, and I think he did say that. And that's an example of a guy that, in fairness, it's hard to play one football game without getting a bump or a bruise. So at the end of an 11, 12, 13 game season, they've all got their little owies and injuries of certain kinds. And again, I'm not making light of it. It's a brutal physical game. And so their fear is that they're not 100% healthy. Then I understand that you don't want to show less than your best. And I think Howell also had, I can't remember the injury. It wasn't like Coral, but
it was a leg. I can't remember if it was a hamstring or a knee. He tweaked something in the last game of the year.
Yeah, and so you want to protect that. I mean, and the agility drills for a quarterback. Let's be honest. Yeah, it matters. You want to see a guy who can move and has escapability in the pocket, but that's not as big a deal as if you couldn't see a wide receiver do agility drill.
No, I brought it up just because of the fact I thought talking about not throwing, and here he is with a bit of an injury and said, "Well, I'll still throw, but I just don't want to do the agility drills." Anyway, so here we are, 40 minutes in, and I promise we get to wide receivers. Mark had asked even before we jumped on the air. He was in here 20 minutes before. So Mark, finally getting into it here for you. Here you go, Hub.
Mark has a question. Is there any chance that the Bears can draft Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson with 2 of their 5 picks? Thank you and have a great day. Considering that Chris Olave was one of the guys who ran 4.26 yesterday, and I was not expecting that. I think he is definitely going in the first round.
I thought he was a guy that would probably be late first round, like one of those guys that maybe you get lucky and he drops into that 36 to 40 range, but after that 40 time, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, no, Olave got himself into the first round yesterday. Now Garrett Wilson, what are the Bears? 39, I think.
Yeah, 39.
I could see Garrett Wilson there at 39, and I like. Listen, you see my hat. I loved all 3 of those Ohio State receivers. You forget once the Ohio State Michigan stuff is over. I said it right after the Michigan Ohio State game that quarterback and those 3 receivers are all going to play on Sunday, and they're all going to get drafted on day 1 or day 2. There was no question about. Obviously, the quarterback's going back, but I think Wilson could fall into the second round, and I think that's a possibility at 39.
Mark had a follow-up question. First off, here he's asking about David Bell and saying 3 receivers seems like too much in a draft. They're not drafting 3 receivers, Mark. They'll probably take 1 in the second or third with their first pick. But there could be a second guy later in the draft, like in the 5th round. But I guess I'll ask you guys thoughts on David Bell. He did have a slower 40 time yesterday, and I do think he will probably be available to the Bears at 39.
Well, yeah, but you've only got 1 pick at 39, and so now he wants Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and David Bell.
Well, that's what I said. That's not they're not taking 2 wide receivers. I don't think with their first 2 picks.
No, and none of those guys are going to be there in the 5th round. No. So if you're asking me which of those 3 do I like the most at 39, in the order you gave them to me, my first pick would be Olave, my second pick would be Wilson, and my third pick would be Bell. And so the only reason you're taking Bell at 39 is if both Olave and Wilson are gone.
Yeah, I think Bell is the most likely, of those 3, I think Bell's the most likely to be there at 39.
And I think what Mark is really getting at there is a fear or a concern from all Bears fans looking at the wide receiver position for the Bears, knowing that Darnell Mooney is the only legitimate or proven wide receiver under contract. Mark, the Bears are going to have to bring in multiple wide receivers. I don't think that's going to be through the draft. And I think they'll probably add 1, maybe 2 in the draft. You got to remember, they only have 5 picks.
I think I wouldn't be surprised if they draft 2, Kyle, but only 1 on day 2.
Yeah.
And so now you get down to the 5th and 6th round. You got 2 5s and a 6. Maybe there's another guy out there that they like. But Mark, what makes this so hard? I'm not trying to cop out on you. We can tell you what we've learned about these prospects. We can indicate where we think they might fall in the draft. We can tell you what more we've learned about what the Bears are thinking about the makeup of their roster and the type of players they're looking for. But this is why the NFL, a lot of people would love to see it reversed and see the draft come first and then free agency, hold off free agency until after the draft. But the league's not going to do that because these teams want to find out in free agency what holes they can fill. And then they can be more comfortable with the draft picks that they're making, because the draft picks are investments in the future. You rarely, maybe in the first round, you're drafting a plug and play guy, maybe in the second round, but for the most part, you're talking about developmental prospects. And so, if they've done it, let's go back again to this column from yesterday. It's at shawlocal.com right now. They are looking for 10 new starters. What I pointed out was looking at the free agents, the 27 UFAs. The ideal scenario for them appears to be if they could re-sign Allen Robinson. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then if they were to re-sign Bilal Nichols and James Daniels and Tayshaun Gibson and Alec Ogletree, you get Gibson and Ogletree on team-friendly one-year incentive-laden deals. There's plenty of cap space to do all that and still have money to move and make another big free agent signing or two, plus work the middle of the roster a little bit. Now you go into the draft, and if you've re-signed A-Rob and you've got Mooney, you're looking for that one superstar that you can develop. They're going to sign a wide receiver in free agency. They're going to sign a couple wide receivers in free agency. The question, guys, is one of them going to be the replacement for A-Rob? Or is it going to be somebody to pair, with him and Mooney? When asked about Allen Robinson on Tuesday, Ryan Poles, there was two different questions. He was asked, how do you repair the communication with Allen Robinson? And he gave a somewhat longer answer, said it's a tough spot, but it can absolutely be done. I feel like it's a fresh start for everybody. And then when asked, should we assume that Allen Robinson will not be back? He said, I'm not there yet. He said, we have not reached that decision yet. And I think that's probably true in large part because they're working on the first part, repairing the communication. But Sean, you were in the room. I mean, I didn't take that as necessarily, they're going to re-sign A-Rob, or that it's a priority for him. But, a lot of this is just reading the body language in the eyes. And I believed him when he said that they haven't really figured that out yet.
No, I didn't read too much into that. And yeah, I think they're just not really, they're not there yet. They haven't figured it out. And just somebody mentioned this in the chat, but I just wanted to mention too, some wide receiver news just in the last hour. Adam Schefter is saying that the Cowboys are likely to cut Amari Cooper. So there's another top end free agent.
That's a problem for
likely.
me. That's a problem for me because I have a giant man crush on Amari Cooper.
So he's going to cost you more than Allen Robinson, I would imagine.
Yeah, we'll see. It's a strange market. It's been a strange wide receiver market the last couple of years.
And we're starting to get, I wouldn't, maybe not as far as to say flooded, but I mean, we're getting a pretty good chunk of maybe not bona fide alpha number one wide receivers, but certainly guys that have the potential to live up to that number one billing. And I wonder if that does drive their markets down a little bit when they start competing against each other.
Well, that and their age. I mean, the only bona fide alpha number one in free agency is Davante Adams. The next two guys who many believe can get into that category are Mike Williams and Chris Godwin. But you got Godwin coming off an ACL. We don't know. The Chargers have the second most cap space in the league. I don't know why they'd let Mike Williams get away. So now you go to the next class, which is the you're talking about the Christian Kirks and the Sammy Watkins, and if Amari Cooper is out there. I mean, A-Rob is a bona fide number one. He was by most ranked in the lower end of the top 10 receivers in the league prior to last year. But the questions with Robinson is, are we completely acknowledging what happened last year? I mean, what was it? Was it just the poor quarterback play? Was it just the changes they clearly made in the offense to go away from him? Was there something physical? We know that he hurt the hamstring and then he got COVID. But prior to that, he didn't look any different to me. They just weren't throwing him the ball.
Do you want to be the team that pays to find out, though? I mean,
and he's 28 years old, which again, I know how young that is, certainly to me, and I think to most people, but by NFL standards, that's middle-aged, and that's why that's Davante Adams' problem. Davante Adams is going to be 30 this year. He's clearly one of the 3 or 4 best receivers in football, but how many more years is he going to be? Because whatever you pay him this year is going to be based on him being that player. So I think what it comes down to, guys, I guess the point I was trying to make is if they re-sign A-Rob, they're still going to be signing a couple wide receivers in free agency, but now you're going to be looking in the middle of the pack. if they don't re-sign A-Rob, they're almost certainly going to make a move at one of these guys with the potential to be a number one, and then try and find another number one in the draft. Because you need 5 receivers. You need to start 3. The only NFL receiver on the roster right now is Darnell Mooney. I mean, maybe you're excited about Daz Newsome. I'm not. I'm not saying he can't be a decent receiver, but didn't see anything to jump up and down about. I would think at this point, if Isaiah Coulter had a big NFL future, the other 3 or 4 practice squads he was on wouldn't have let him go. I mean, you're talking basically Darnell Mooney, and that's it right now.
And a lot depends on who you draft, or if you're taking someone in let's say that day 2. A lot depends on what you do at wide receiver in free agency in terms of outside or inside, or the type of wide receiver you're looking for. You sign a bigger body guy like Mike Williams and Amari Cooper, well, then you already have Darnell Mooney, who's shown he can play outside. Maybe you're looking more at the speed slot receiver, or if you go after someone like Juju or Chris Godwin, who I don't particularly know what Godwin's going to command coming off the ACL, but those are guys that have shown to work better in the slot, and maybe you're looking at a bigger body receiver in the draft.
Juju is a high-end number 2. I mean, I don't think he's ever going to be a 1. He's a really good number 2, kind of like Darnell Mooney. And so if you were able to put Robinson, Smith-Schuster, and Mooney together, you could scare some teams.
That would be fun.
Now, if Robinson is gone, and then you sign Juju and you've got Mooney, then you got to be looking for your number 1 in the draft and hope that he's still there in the second round.
Yeah, that's kind of how I think about, or kind of was positioning that. You really want that alpha outside receiver, I think, right? In some fashion. And
the comp to that would be, like we said, a Christian Kirk. I know Kyle, I think you said at one point you're a DJ Chark guy. I just haven't seen enough of him to get excited about him. But certainly Christian Kirk has, bottom of the number 1, top end number 2 type talent. Juju Smith-Schuster has it. Sammy Watkins is a really good number 2. He just never became a number 1. So those guys are out there, and that may be the way they approach it. It wouldn't be surprising.
Sammy Watkins and Will Fuller also on the market. 2 guys that,
Fuller
have the upside. They just can't stay on. I mean, Sammy Watkins can't stay on the field either.
Yeah, Will Fuller has number 1 ability, but he's
I love him.
Yeah, Watkins hasn't had nearly the injury problems that Fuller has. It's that guy, he's a wonderful. Again, I don't dislike Ohio State people once they're done at Ohio State, but he can't stay on the football field. And how much money are you going to pay to take the chance that that's finally going to change? I think he's going to be one who's really going to struggle with some of the offers he sees in free agency.
Sean, I'm trying to pull up Sammy Watkins here really quickly. If you have any wide receiver thoughts.
No, I mean, you guys pretty much hit the nail on the head there. Certainly, yeah. When's I don't know about you, but I don't see them franchising A-Rob again. Do you?
No. I mean,
with the cost that's gonna.
Well, they'd have to pay. I think the second tag is a 5% surplus and 5% of. And by the way, the franchise number is going to go from 18 to 19 million. So now, if you got to add another million to that, 20 million. No. I mean, you can't after the season he had. How can you just
especially after that?
The
deadline for that is March 8th. By the way, that's next week.
The only possibility with that is that you have a new GM and a new head coach who know how great their needs are, but don't want to get tied up long term. But I still just don't see it not coming off that season last year. The other concern is that A-Rob had been remarkably healthy since he got here, and he was 1 year removed from an ACL when he got here. But he missed 5 games last year, and I think 4 of them, or maybe it was only he had three games in the bye with the hamstring. Again, I'd have to go back and study more tape. I didn't see any signs of physical deterioration, but even though he's only 28, he's also got 8 years in the league, and that takes a pounding on these bodies. So the transition tag is different. It's still a lot of money, but it's a little bit less money. It's really more used to help guys test the market. You can always rescind it. So I don't, before he signs the tender. My guess though, if I'm his agent and the Bears hang a tag on him, I'm signing that tender 20 minutes later because I don't want it pulled, once they do it. But I just, it's hard to see them tagging him at this point with the number of receivers out there in free agency. Some of whom are going to at least be close to A-Rob, who are going to come with a lot less than that tag figure. I wouldn't think they would do it.
Michael Gallup is another guy that we haven't mentioned who's set to be a free agent, but I would think that this Amari Cooper news means that the Cowboys are going to try to keep him long term.
Well, beyond that, though, he never even became a surefire number 2 in Dallas. He certainly wasn't a number 1. He's a high draft pick, but I'm trying to remember any great moments I've seen from Michael Gallup in his 4 years in the league. I mean, I think that wasn't he a first rounder that they didn't pick up the 5th year on?
I got to double check on that. Let me take a look. He was a 3rd round pick.
Okay, he wasn't a first rounder, so there was no 5th year. That's what it was. Well, he's never, to me, been anything special.
He's another guy too who's coming off an injury as well.
And it's here. I got Sammy Watkins. I just want to blow up here. The last 4 years, so going back to the 2018 season, games started 9-13, 9-9. Only more than 55 targets once. He had 90 targets in 2019. So I'm pretty sure he's dealt with some hamstring and like lower body soft tissue issues over the last few years.
Yeah, and by the way, just to be clear, he's not a high on my list, of guys that I'm dying. He's just one of those guys that you lump into that group because I know, was a number 1 coming out, and great things were expected of him.
I think he's a guy where if he's your second guy that you sign, you feel pretty good about. I wouldn't want you to, if the Bears said we're going with Sammy Watkins and that's really all we're bringing in terms of top talent at wide receiver, I don't think that would be enough.
That wouldn't get anybody excited, I don't think.
No.
Yeah, well, some fans would celebrate because all they know about him is the Baltimore Ravens game last year. But, nonetheless, it wouldn't be a real exciting signing. Yeah, Watkins and Gallup and Chark. I mean, some of these guys, I'm not saying any of them would be bad additions, depending on what else you've got, but they don't exactly solve the problem by themselves.
All right, we're at an hour here. We're going to finish it up with a question from Dr. Earl. With Dr. Earl, please really appreciate you joining us. Maybe not all caps when you ask the question next time, though.
He's passionate about it.
Well, it's easy to do. You just hit the caps lock. So do you guys feel that the Bears are going to be aggressive going after Olave at receiver? Dr. Earl saw the 40 time yesterday. Yesterday. It's Friday morning. I believe it was Thursday when Olave clocked the 4.2640, which really surprised a lot of people. Doc, how do you want him to be aggressive? The last thing you want to do is give up more draft choices. So you talk about moving up into the first round. I would be really surprised and quite frankly disappointed if Ryan Poles started trading next year's draft picks. I don't think that's where they want to go. He actually did talk about acquiring more picks. And so I think they'd be more likely to be trading down than trading up. I love Olave. I'm not saying I'd be disappointed if they were aggressive going after him, but Sean, I just don't know that they have the resources, the tools to do that.
Yeah, I don't see them trading up into the first round, which is probably what it's going to take to get him at this point. Especially because, like you said, you've already sort of you've been dealt this hand now. Ryan Poles is taking over as GM, and they don't have a lot of picks this year. You don't have your first round pick. I don't see them doing that a second year in a row after what they did last year.
Yeah, I don't have the trade chart in front of me, guys, because I didn't know we were actually going to get into this deep in the weeds yet. We don't know enough about these guys, but I'm just guessing that after that 4.2640, that Olave goes somewhere around 20 to 25. To get from 39 to, let's say, 23, it would cost you this year's 2, and I believe next year's 1, and I don't see them doing that. I would hope they wouldn't do that. I'd be disappointed if they did that, as much as I'd love to have Chris Olave.
Particularly with, as we just talked about, the wealth of options in free agency to then go back and then trade more draft capital. And I like Olave. I like Drake London, who's going to be one of the top picks in the draft, but I don't actually think there's a wide receiver that I feel like super confident, like this is the next megastar. There were several guys last year in the draft. There are guys I like I said, including Drake London. I like Olave, but I don't think there's guys that you should be breaking the bank in terms of draft capital to go up and get.
It's funny you say that because last year everybody kept debating about the 3 Bama kids, and I kept saying I would trade half my roster for Jamar Chase. I mean, believe me, I get this wrong more than I get it right, but that one was when I just knew Chase, and you saw what he did this year. Of the 3 Bama kids, I loved Devontae Smith. I mean, I thought, if I could get one of these guys, I'd give up a lot. This group is being heralded as being similar to that group, but not at the top, and in part because of the injuries at the top. I mean, James Williams, probably would be the first guy. I don't know where he goes coming off an ACL in a bowl game. I mean, that it's not inconceivable that he could slip down to 39. And now, if you're willing to take a chance on the ACL, you're getting a guy who probably would have been the top rated receiver in the draft if he hadn't. So that's all the work we still have to do over the next 6-8 weeks as we get closer and find out what teams are really thinking about these guys.
All right, I'm going to throw it back to you in just a second, Hub, to wrap it up. But Michael just threw in this about, again, asking about Amari Cooper. Reports are Amari Cooper is likely to be released. Considering the depth of wide receivers in the draft, what do you think his free agent market will be? And what I just want to say is, one, we talked about it a little earlier, Mike, if you want to go back. But the thing is, what are we? Is it next week we get the franchise tag deadline?
Yeah,
and the it's on the 8th. What is that, Tuesday?
That is the deadline to tag them. And then there's another deadline that comes to rescind those tags, but that's the deadline to tag them.
Michael, what I would say is come back next week because we're going to be talking wide receiver a lot more next week because we're going to have an idea. The following week after that is when free agency begins. By the time we do another one of these, we're going to have that past the franchise tag period. We'll be locked in. We'll have a better idea of exactly how many wide receivers are going to be on the market then. And like I said, I expect the wide receiver market to be a bit depressed because of the wealth of options, but we'll have a better idea next week.
I go, guys, just off the top of my head without any lists in front of me, the only wideout that I could see getting tagged is Mike Williams. And I think the Chargers might be silly if they don't tag Mike Williams. But other than that, Amari Cooper is another one of these guys. Remember when he was traded from Oakland to Dallas, it was because he had not met the glowing number 1 expectations, coming out in the draft. He was definitely better, in Dallas than he was in Oakland, but not better enough to keep them from going and getting CD Lamb, and who they got another, they used a couple high draft picks on wide receivers. So, there's a reason the Cowboys are moving on from him. Again, I don't think he gives you the high end number 1 that you want. To me, he's probably a really high end number 2, maybe at the bottom of the number 1s, but it's not a guy that I want to break the bank for, I guess is where I'd leave it. And with that, I think we need to leave because we have gone about an hour. We really appreciate everybody being with us each week, guys. If you want to join us automatically, just go to the App Store on your phone or go to iTunes and download a subscription. You can do that by going to shawlocal.com. Or if you want to join us live every Friday morning at 9:30 Chicago time, just watch our Twitter accounts. It's at Kyle Neighbors. It's at Sean_Hammond. It's at Hub_Arkush. And we're going every Friday at 9:30 Chicago time. Unless you hear differently, we will either remind you or warn you via Twitter. And by getting to those Twitter accounts, you can get right into the podcast or just by going to YouTube and you can join us. We enjoy taking your questions. It's kind of a good way to set the cast up. And we really would love it if you read our stuff as well. shawlocal.com. Please don't take this wrong, Kyle, but we've always got a special of some kind running, and I know it's just not that expensive. You're talking about pennies a day to get what we hope is, what we know is some of, and we hope is the best coverage of the Bears in the NFL and the NFC North anywhere in the Chicago area. So with that, everybody have a great week. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll be back with you again next week.